Hello everyone, it's Vritzien, and welcome to episode 2 of RWBY Volume 8 from a writer's perspective. If you have not seen the first episode of this series, I would suggest you pause this video and go watch it now. It'll help you understand the general idea of the series, and will explain the criteria for my counters. Also, I'd like to thank everyone for the positive feedback of my first video. It was extremely reassuring to see such feedback and encouraging for me to continue this series. In that regard, if you like this video and want to see more of this series in the future, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel growth immensely. With that, let's get back to the review. Part 2C, Episode 3. Episode 3, Strings, begins with RWBY tumbling through the snowshoe sleeping tubes. She exacerbatedly catches her breath as Penny tries to support her. On the other side of the room, Weiss angrily pinches Nora's ear as she tries to explain that riding those tubes is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Weiss lets her go as Blake arrives. Disoriented slightly, she says that she never wants to do that again. I know I already touched on this last episode, but man, it sure is convenient that there are no guards in this top-secret military facility. As the girls regroup in the center of the room, May asks Robo-Girl Penny to figure out their next path. Penny scans the facility and gives them a long list of turns they need to take before reaching their destination. As everyone but RWBY is amazed by Penny's directions, she clarifies that her name is Penny. RWBY then slyly crosses her arms at May, who rolls her eyes and proceeds to conceal them all. I really love the, I would say jerky, but that's not really right, cartoonish animation that they give Penny here for what she gives these directions. It really matches the mechanical nature of Penny's delivery. However, I find it strange that May calls Penny the Robo-Girl here, especially considering that May is a trans woman. Now, I'm not trans myself, but I would imagine of all people, May would understand how offensive or hurtful a statement like that could be, right? Like, surely May wouldn't want people referring to her as a biological male. I know this isn't my lane, but the fact the show draws attention to it with RWBY's gesture makes me think that we're supposed to feel the same way we did last episode when Yang scolded that old racist woman. If you're trans, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this scene down below. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it just seems off to me. Anyways, under the cloak of May's semblance, they make their way to the elevator. As the elevator reaches a level they weren't expecting, everyone scoots back in the elevator. The door opens as two soldiers enter. As May warns the rest of the group to be quiet, one of the soldiers mentions their ships can't even get close to Mantra without being shot out of the air. The other soldier says it's creepy that the Grimm are just waiting, and that it's worse than if they were just attacking. The first soldier susses her, saying that she'll jinx them as the elevator reaches RWBY's team's destination. As they all slowly file out, Nora presses every single button, stickering to herself. The first soldier notices all the buttons are pressed and the elevator door closes. I love that Nora did that. It's a good joke, and a way to make sure the elevator is useless for the time being. I do have a minor nitpick here, as Nora's snickering should be noticed by the soldiers. It's already been established that May's semblance doesn't block sound, and it's a cramped elevator. It's not bad enough to put it on the list, but I just wanted to point it out. Moving on, RWBY's team moves to the opposite end of the hall, which is locked by a terminal. Penny's finger opens up to reveal an adapter, which prompts RWBY to quietly geek out over it. Penny then sticks it into the terminal, and after a few seconds, it opens, accepting Pietro's credentials. Okay, so why do Pietro's credentials work here? Pietro's a fugitive, just like the rest of the protagonists right now. Shouldn't just attempting to use those credentials trigger some kind of security breach and, you know, not let people use them to access restricted and classified areas? Like, we knew the writers were at least partially aware of that, as using his credentials immediately trips an alarm that alerts Ironwood. Why would Ironwood have it do that instead of immediately triggering a lockdown/security breach alert? Are we supposed to assume that Ironwood's semblance didn't make him think of that either?
Don't make me tap the sign.
Regardless, May asks where they need to go next. Penny enthusiastically points to the Central Command Center, revealing a room of soldiers and technicians. Amazing shot, by the way. Of course, Weiss exclaims frustratedly. May explains that she won't be able to maneuver them through all that, but Penny tells them not to worry as she explains how RWBY's semblance works.
RWBY is capable of traveling at an extreme velocity from one point to another by breaking herself down to her molecular components, thus negating her mass and then reassembling them at the destination, theoretically making it possible for her to transport all of us in the same way, as mass no longer matters.
Okay, so functionally this scene is meant to explain why RWBY is able to carry them all with their semblance. But the problem here is twofold. For one, that's not how mass works. This explanation makes no sense. Breaking down to your molecular components does not negate your mass. Because, fun fact, molecules still have mass! Sorry, I'm calm. All Penny's description would mean is that their mass will be distributed over a larger area, not negated. The other problem here is its explanation is completely redundant. We already know that RWBY can move more than one person with their semblance because we've already seen it happen. Twice! Back in Volume 4 during the Geist fight, and in Volume 6 on the train. So why waste time confusing everyone to give redundant information? I will say though, I like the small cartoony bit visualizing Penny's exclamation. It's a pretty cute little shot. Anyway, Ruby stares at Penny dumbfounded as Blake asks if she figured out her semblance before she did. And Ruby snaps back saying that she figured out Blake was a faunus before she did. Elsewhere, Ironwood enters the room and apologizes for being late, as today has been busy, implying he's coming directly from shooting the one councilman. He approaches Watts as he's typing away in front of several monitors, one of which shows Penny's schematics. Ironwood then asks if Watts has made any progress, and that he'd hate to have to motivate Watts more as he places his hands on Watts' shoulders. Watts says that he has all the motivation that he needs, given what they're after, but it doesn't make taking down Pietro's magical science project any easier. Ironwood says that he trusts Watts will come up with something. Watts says the trust is palpable, as the shot cuts to the 4 guards pointing their rifles at him. I really like this type of situational humor, and I hope that RT includes more of it in future volumes. Suddenly, a pop-up alerting them of Pietro's credentials being used appears on Watts' screen. Watts coyly tells Ironwood about the alarm, asking if he knows whether it's Pietro or someone else using them. Man, if only someone stripped Pietro of all of his credentials when Ironwood designated them as fugitives. Ironwood broadcasts the level 3 lockdown, granting permission to use lethal force on all threats. Weiss exclaims that he has to be joking, as Penny alerts them that the pneumatic tubes have been closed off. Wow, it was really that easy to shut down their entire plan? Blake says that they're trapped, but May says that she saw a hangar that they passed by, and that she could find them a ship to escape with. Penny says they should still be able to succeed, given how close they are. Nora snaps her fingers, coming up with an idea. As the guard leaves Central Command, May walks in and trips one of them holding a coffee mug. It splatters on a terminal in someone's pants, who screams in pain. The other workers start to scold Bill, as the guy covered in coffee runs out. As he opens the door, Ruby carries everyone but May past the guards. Blake then remarks that travel like this is another thing she never wants to do again. So, ignoring the violation of the laws of physics that is Ruby's semblance, they are aware that Ruby is still visible, right? Remember, Mercury not only could see her, but was able to knock Ruby out of her semblance in Volume 3, so she clearly isn't invisible or intangible. And there's like a dozen or so people in that room, and a big red blob radiating rose petals against a gray backdrop isn't very subtle. You mean to tell me that nobody noticed that? Not to mention their plan relied on 2 separate people exiting the room without the not-so-subtle ensemble of characters hiding in the corner, without being seen. You can literally see Blake in the corner as May enters the command center. Are Atlas's people just blind? Either way, the team passes through the totally not a battle arena pathway to their destination. Like, is there any other reason to design the path to this super important classified area like this? One bomb and any infiltrator can cut off the only way to get to the room, leaving them free reign to hack all of Atlas's systems. Regardless, as they reach the door, Penny uses her port to disable the electricity field and unlock it. Man, they're really getting a lot of mileage on the credentials that shouldn't have worked in the first place. The team enters to find the room empty, to the shock of everyone but Penny, and the audience too. Ruby asks where everyone is, and Penny explains that this room is classified. As they enter, the door shuts behind them, and the electric field is initiated, catching Nora's interest briefly. Excellent foreshadowing. Why is the door to the classified terminal unguarded? As I already pointed out several times, a single person with the right stolen credentials, i.e. a non-fugitives, could easily slip into this room and steal whatever they want without even raising a single red flag. And even using Pietro's credentials got them there without tripping any security alerts, even after the security breach was broadcast to the entire base and put under lockdown. Shouldn't people in, I don't know, the Central Command just down the hall be immediately alerted by this and try to stop them? Is Ironwood completely incompetent? I get that the ASOPs were sent there, but instead of allowing the team to get what they came for, I'm sure even without Watts' tech genius, Ironwood could completely shut them out, alerting the entire base that they are there, or something. Anything! Okay, Vritzien, calm down. Ruby and Penny approach the main console. Penny takes a seat in the chair, takes a deep breath, and tells Pietro over the intercom that she's ready. Penny's eyes then switch from green to yellow. Ruby looks surprised, and Pietro explains that the process of getting the data they need is very complicated, and is remoting in to do it for them. So let me get this straight. They needed Pietro's credentials to get into the facility, and Pietro needed to be the one to get them access from the terminal. Remind me again why Penny needed to be there? I really like the stuttered innovation of Pietro-controlled Penny here. It's a great way of visualizing the remote aspect of Pietro's control. While everyone is waiting for Pietro to finish, Blake expresses to Weiss and Nora that she hopes that Yang's team is okay, and that she's never seen Yang and Ruby fight like that before. Weiss tells her not to worry, as they're sisters, and they sometimes just have different ideas of what's right. Nora chimes in, remarking that John is a great leader, Oscar has grown a lot, and that Yang is more than capable of protecting all of them in a fight. With the obvious person not being mentioned, Weiss and Blake look up at Nora with a hint of concern and in unison. Nora then starts to mention Ren, but trails off. She then admits that she doesn't know what he is anymore. She tries to talk about how the two of them are making progress, but then trails off again. She then states that while they've been together for their entire lives, she feels like she understands him even less than she has before, clarifying she doesn't even know if it's his problem or hers. Blake then says that being with someone for so long makes them a part of you, but emphasizes that it's only a part, and not to forget about the rest. Nora miserably chuckles, stating that she doesn't even know who she is anymore without Ren. She tries to joke that it's pretty sad of her. Weiss then suggests he takes this opportunity to find out, do something that only Nora can do. Nora dismissively asks, like what, be strong and hit stuff? More great foreshadowing here. Before Blake and Weiss is able to say something else, Pietro finishes up. I actually like this exchange on a number of levels, so I'll get my criticism out of the way first. It's extremely annoying that RWBY and Yang's conflict is only brought up just to immediately pivot to another character's issues. Not only that, Weiss's reasoning for dismissing it is extremely flimsy. Weiss of all people should understand how just being family doesn't mean conflicts between them always work out. That aside, this scene is a godsend for Nora and her development. One issue many people, including myself, have had with Nora is how flat she is. She's the only member of Team Juniper without any development, and her bit about being this spastic comic relief who loves Ren can only go so far. The fact that Nora admits here that she doesn't even know who she is without Ren is an excellent step for her to take, and even though it's not fully resolved in this volume, it's a great start. I also really like how it's Blake that tells Nora how being with someone for so long makes them a part of you. It implies to me that she's reflecting on her life with Adam, and has grown from it. Back to the plot. Everyone regroups around Penny as Pietro finishes gathering the cloned imprint. He explains that once Penny arrives at Amity, they'll begin the launch sequence. Amity Systems will try to request permission from Ironwood's terminal, but will reach Penny instead. With that, Pietro disconnects from Penny. While what Pietro is specifically explaining here is technically new information for us, it's information that everyone in that room should already know, and it was heavily implied in the previous episode. In my opinion, this should have been explained back in Mantle while everyone was still making their plans on what to do. After regaining control, Penny adds that after the launch, she'll return to help with the evacuation. Pietro calls in and tells her that she should stay on Amity with himself and Maria. Penny states that everyone will need her there, but RWBY says that Penny staying out of Salem's reach will keep her away from getting the relic. Weiss states that might be for the best. So I know in the last episode, I asked why Penny didn't volunteer to help with the evacuation, and I recognize that RWBY is right here. However, for one, this should have been discussed in the first episode. The same point applies equally well to Penny infiltrating the Atlas base. Ironwood wants Penny so he can get the relic. So being in Mantle to help with the evacuation from Salem's forces is riskier than literally walking into Ironwood's base to do something Pietro could do as well. Does that make sense to anyone? Like I mentioned in the last episode, the writers decided how they wanted Penny to get hacked first, and just made everyone else stupid so it could happen that way. Anyways, feeling defeated, Penny opens the door while stating that sometimes people have to do something they'd rather not. The door opens and everyone is shocked to see the Aesops waiting for them. Harriet greets them and tells Penny that it's time to come home. As everyone but Penny draws their weapons, Weiss asks if losing to them once wasn't enough. Marrow states that they were holding back last time. Okay, this is not a Volume 7 review, but come on. This is such a lame excuse for why the just got my huntsman license a few days ago protagonist beat the best huntsman in Atlas, that it almost feels like a self-deprecating joke. I have more problems with that fight, but that's neither here nor there. So let's just move on for now. Vine steps forward and attempts to reason with Penny. He acknowledges that Penny did what she thought was best by leaving with the Maiden's power, but Salem is here, and things have changed. Penny retorts that if Ironwood still plans to leave Mantle behind, nothing has changed. Vine sighs and states that he thought Penny was supposed to protect people and not hurt them. Penny said that she never hurt anyone, but Elm states that Winter is in critical condition because of her, and Harriet adds that she stole the power that was meant for Winter. Penny tries to explain the situation, but Harriet cuts her off, saying people in Atlas and Mantle are going to die if she continues to act the way she is. Before we continue, the Aesop's accusations against Penny are so gaslighty that it legitimately threw me off the first time I watched this. I genuinely can't tell if it was intended to be that way. Like, did Winter forget to mention Cinder, or are the Aesops just ignoring that fact? I know that Harriet, at least to some extent, is ignoring the truth, as implied with their scene with Robin later on, but Marrow, Vine, they seem to at least be interested in knowing what the actual truth is. This isn't bad, per se, I just wish that someone, RWBY, could call them out on their lies, especially when she's called out Ironwood's lies earlier this episode. Meryl steps forward and pleads with Penny to come with them to open the vault, saying that it'll save Atlas. Ruby retorts that it won't, saying that Salem will pursue them everywhere they go. Before she can explain any further, Harriet cuts her off, saying she'll throw Ruby in jail with Crow if she keeps talking. Ruby growls and starts to move, but is blocked by Penny, who says to leave her alone. Harriet asks what she'll do, prompting Penny to step outside the gate and get separated from the rest of the team. Penny activates her glowing eyes, and the fight begins. So I'm not digging into the fight scenes for this section, but I do have a couple things I want to say about it on a narrative level. For one, I'm glad Vine actually gets to use his weapon. The fact he didn't in his fight against Team RWBY last volume annoyed the hell out of me. Also, this fight didn't need to happen at all. If the Aesop's goal is just to capture Penny, why didn't it immediately open with Marrow using his semblance? We know he can basically hold it as long as he wants, and on as many people as he wants, as shown by him freezing the 3 other Aesops upon switching sides. Like, what's the benefit of attacking her? Breaking her aura does not prevent her from using her maiden powers. So even if you do knock her out, the second she wakes up, she'd be just as dangerous, if not even more so, even if she doesn't have her swords. Back in the server room, Weiss's knight attempts to break the door down, but disintegrates after shoulder checking it. Weiss remarks about the Aesops being cowards as it's a 4v1. Ruby reassures her that as a Winter Maiden, Penny should be able to hold herself for at least a little while. At least Meryl finally remembers how his semblance works, only proving my point this fight had no reason to exist. Nora stresses they have to go to help. She draws Mag Healed, quoting her, "Be strong and hit stuff" line. Weiss tells her to wait as Nora draws the power from the grid, spiking her hair up and sending electricity arcing across her skin. With a ferocious cry, Nora smashes the door down, knocking the Aesops off Penny. As the smoke clears, the lightning across Nora's skin fades, leaving burn marks across her skin. She says, "That was pretty awesome," before her aura shatters and she collapses. Penny runs to Nora's side as Blake, Weiss, and Ruby stand guard. This is easily one of the best scenes of the volume by far, and since I want to gush about it for a little bit, I'm going to pause here and use it as an example of why it's so important to nail the setup for your payoffs. For one, as soon as Ruby's team enters the room and the door shuts behind them, the episode pauses just long enough to show Nora staring at the door. This sets up a loose connection between the door itself and Nora. Next, as we established earlier in this scene, Nora's having a crisis of identity. She feels that without Ren, she doesn't know who she is. Nora then suggests to Nora to do something that only she can do. This prompts Nora to say her "be strong and hit stuff" line. On first viewing, this is just a small little meta joke about Nora's personality and the actions of the past, but then when Nora repeats the line as she's about to smash the door, it subconsciously reminds the audience of Weiss's advice. Then it clicks. Smashing an electrically shielded door is something only Nora could do. Oh, and let's not forget it's foreshadowed in the intro as well. All of that combined setup makes the payoff of Nora busting that door down so cathartic. And that's not even to mention the scars that perfectly encapsulate Nora's development. I'm not going to speak on the nature of its representation, but it's at least something. 10 out of 10 scene. In fact, I'd also like to reiterate before moving on why this show is so frustrating for me. Amazing scenes like that just only highlight how lazy and lackluster the writing around it is. It makes me wonder what the show could look like if the entire thing was written with the same level of care and attention to detail. But anyways, back to the plot. Ironwood, who's watching from his scroll, frustratedly cries out that they've just blew their chance. He starts to signal his troops to converge on the area as Watts turns around, saying that he has a message for the Aesops. Hey everyone, Future Vritzien here. So I recognize that it makes sense for Ironwood not to send his troops here, specifically because Watts can hack Penny with just a sword. However, after the Aesops steal Penny's sword, what's the harm in sending in the troops to try to apprehend them anyway? Or at least attempting to. There are also fugitives that Ironwood wants to capture regardless, as I've laboriously reminded you all throughout this episode alone. Sure, you could argue that Ironwood might believe it to be a waste of men. Firstly, damn. A flat admission of how useless he and his men are would honestly be kind of refreshing. Secondly, yeah, it probably would be a stupid endeavor, but not only is it jarring for a general to just allow his adversaries and people he wants to have arrested just frolic around in his base, let's be honest, Ironwood's already done plenty of stupid shit in this volume. Just say his semblance made him do it. RT seems to be really fond of that excuse for every other stupid thing he's done. On another note, I'll be expanding on this more in a little bit, but offering no resistance to Ruby's team is hella suspicious, and if Ruby's team was actually smart, they would probably catch on to what was going on. Anyways, back to the episode. As the standoff between them lingers, the Aesops receive their new orders. Harriet tries to argue against it, as Marrow confirms the order. The fighting begins again, with Vine immediately knocking Blake, Ruby, and Weiss off the platform. Ruby catches herself with Crescent Rose as Blake and Weiss grab onto Ruby. Blake and Weiss then fall as Ruby grabs her with her semblance. As they get back on the platform, Harriet grabs one of Penny's swords and rips it out of her pack. The Aesops then leave, with Marrow remorsefully looking back at the party before leaving himself. Weiss and Blake remark on their departure being highly suspicious as Penny flies over to Nora. She tries to grab Mag Healed, but recoils as she's stalked by it. It cuts to them with Penny carrying Nora, entering the hangar. Seeing nothing, they briefly stop as May whistles to them, asking if you're coming or what. As they enter May's bubble, she sees Nora's condition. Blake states that Nora's in bad shape and needs to be taken to somewhere safe. It focuses on Penny as her maiden eyes light up again. They blast a hole in the hangar and escape. So, I have two questions here. First, how does May have enough aura at this point? She's been literally using it here since they arrived at the base, and they've been there for what, a half hour at least? It's such a powerful semblance for how low aura cost it seems to have. Secondly, did they not seriously encounter any Atlas guards the entire time they were running back? They would have had to pass through the highly congested central command room again, and make it to the hangar without tripping any alarms in the lockdown military base. Surely you expect them to have to fight their way out, right? Did Ironwood forget that they were there after the Aesops left? Does he not want the fugitives to be captured at all? This applies to May as well. She's assumedly been standing there since Ruby and her team made it to the server room. You mean to tell me that not a single person stepped into her bubble that entire time? Or that no one watching the security cameras was alarmed when one of their ships just disappeared from view? I swear, it's easier to break into Atlas's base than it is to kill a single Beowulf. It's a miracle that Watts didn't take down the entire city single-handedly last volume, especially after getting access to all their internal networks. As May flies them out, Penny sets Nora on the floor and apologizes. She looks to Ruby and asks if she has to go now. Ruby gives her a hug, promising that they'll see each other again soon. Penny looks to Weiss and Blake, who both smile at her reassuredly. As they break their embrace, May opens the cockpit, allowing Penny to salute them before flying off to Amity. Back with Ironwood, he congratulates the Aesops for their good work as Harriet hands him Penny's sword. Harriet remarks that good work would have been capturing Penny. As Ironwood hands the sword to Watts, he says, "You know what they say, if you can't beat them, make them join you," as the episode ends. Alright everyone, you know the drill. As we end episode 3, here are our updated counters, our plot points, and character arc updates. Part 2D, Episode 4. Episode 4, Fault, begins with Robin recounting a story of Joanna losing a fight, remarking how she never had before, at least not a fair one. She looks to both Crow and Jock and notices that neither of them are paying attention. She sighs and remarks that it being a tough crowd, and jokes how Ironwood should have paid for better cell block entertainment. This gets a chuckle out of Crow, who stares at Clover's now cleaned off pin. Robin says that she got him to smile, and jokingly asks if that means she wins. Crow remarks that it's her game and he didn't make the rules. She apologizes for what happened to Clover, and reassures him that it isn't his fault. Crow disagrees, saying that he made a deal with the darkness that Clover had to pay for. He adds that it happened so fast, and wishfully thinks that they could have fought together against Tyrion. He then remarks that the worst part of it is, for the first time in a while, he thought he could have finally been around someone without his semblance making things complicated. Lastly stating that it seems like a childish dream now, that's gone, like everyone else. Robin tries to sympathize, explaining that since most people worry that she'll sniff out their secrets, it makes relationships difficult. I like that Robin is trying to help Crow through his trauma, both with jokes and sympathizing with his plight, as she's probably the only other person in the show whose semblance can negatively impact her relationship with others for the worst. I'm not going to dwell on this, as it's not canon yet, but I'm not sure of the idea of them becoming a relationship. Given the fandom's reaction to Clover's death, I worry that them becoming a couple would just come off as comp head, regardless of how it's executed, which I believe would just be a dumpster fire. Again, this isn't canon as of this volume, and they may not even be planning on doing that. It's just something that's been on my mind watching their scenes together. Anyways, Watts is brought back, escorted by Marrow and Harriet, and thrown into his cell as Crow states that he never thought of it that way. Harriet snaps at Crow that he shouldn't be allowed to carry Clover's pin. Crow states that he didn't kill Clover. Harriet acknowledges that he says that, but retorts that it was his weapon covered in Clover's blood. Crow looks away and sighs as Robin tells her that if she really wants to know, Harriet can open the cell and take her hand. As Harriet paces towards Robin's cell, she says that if she does open the cell, it won't be to shake hands, as Marrow walks in his cell. Robin says that Harriet doesn't actually care about the truth, and just wants someone to be mad at, adding that it's easier than taking an honest look at what side she's on. Harriet seemingly begins to consider the offer, as Marrow asks what she's doing. Harriet grunts and pushes past him, saying nothing. Robin goes back to laying on her bed, remarking how that was almost exciting. I'm glad that the issue of Robin's semblance proving Crow's innocence is addressed. My issue with this scene though is Marrow. I get he's just trying to follow orders, but why does he stop Harriet here? He's the first one of the group that turns against Ironwood, and it's already been signaled in the previous episode. Plus, does Marrow not want to hear the truth as well? Surely they can open part of the hard white walls, right? Just enough for Harriet to stick her arm in, or Robin's out? Or do they have to open the whole cell to feed them? If so... Also, Hello again everyone, Future Vritzien here. Something I hadn't considered when writing this script is, could they have just opened Crow and Robin's cells and have her prove Crow's innocence without risking a prison break? Their cells are literally adjacent to each other. All Harriet would need to do is let Robin do that, and Crow is completely proven innocent. That doesn't necessarily mean though that Harriet and Marrow would have to let them go at that point, but Harriet and or Marrow still refusing to free them after that would just make Robin's "you don't care about the truth" line resonate even more. And could be another axis by which Marrow starts to question his loyalties. Oh well, I guess not. It then cuts to Yang's team as they pursue the Hound outside the city limits. John explains that they're going to lose them in the mountains, and they can't keep up with it. Ren's bike starts to wobble uncontrollably as he questions how much longer their bikes can stand the cold. Yang exclaims that she wishes one of them could fly, as John gets an idea. He expands his shield, and using the gravity dust in it, propels Ren into the air. Ren then grapples onto the Hound's leg. Yang and John high-five as she praises John for his idea. John nearly loses his balance as they continue their pursuit. The Hound tries to shake Ren, slamming him into the cliff and flying erratically. John tells Ren to hold on, who exclaims that he doesn't really have a choice. Using his second grappling hook, Ren grapples onto a large stone, slowing the Hound down enough for Yang and John to start catching up. The Hound then shakes Ren around, enough for him to lose traction of the stone. Yang then repels up a ledge and starts to shoot at the Hound from a similar elevation. The Hound then grabs Oscar from his mouth, before making a loud cry, instantly attracting a large horde of sentinels. Yang questions if it intentionally called for backup. As Yang and John avoid/destroy the Grim in her path, Ren starts to pull himself closer to the Hound and Oscar. One sentinel manages to spit acid onto John's bike, causing his engine's integrity to quickly deteriorate. Yang calls out to him, and using a sentinel as a springboard, John propels himself to the upper level, where Yang grabs him. The two advance closer and closer as a T-Rex lands in their path. Thinking fast, John grabs a shield generator and hurls it in front of it. Yang is able to use it as a ramp and escape the horde. As they sigh in relief, they quickly notice an upcoming cliff. They ditch the bike, causing it to crash into a boulder as they tumble off the ledge. Ren then swoops in, saving them from falling, and an approaching T-Rex. The Hound escapes, flying towards Monstra, and well beyond their reach. This is a pretty well-paced action scene that gives everyone a chance to shine, even the Hound. It calling for backup demonstrates its intelligence, and, in my opinion, it's a good way to help demonstrate the silver-eyed warrior underneath, as they've been described as natural leaders. At the Schnee Manor, Weiss knocks on the door and is answered by Whitley. He starts to sass her, but Weiss points Mirtanastra at him and tells him to stop talking, and that they're coming in. Whitley steps aside as everyone enters. He remarks how badly things already are after Jock was arrested, and asks if she's expecting them to harbor fugitives, adding that the Schnee family has a reputation to uphold. After setting Nora down, Blake asks if that's really what he's worried about. Woodley responds saying that they've already lost all the house staff, and Willow's locked herself in her room. Weiss snaps back, asking if he realizes they're trying to save Atlas. Ruby steps in, saying that Nora is hurt and they just need a place to lay low, and then they'll be out of his way. Whitley then caves and asks what they need him to do, to which Weiss orders him to go to his room. Whitley sighs and does as he's told. Weiss instructs them where to go, and May picks up Nora to follow. Okay, Weiss, you're still my favorite character, but...
What is that? What the fuck is that? What is that?
Ruth repeat.
Did Weiss forget what Willow told her last volume? How Whitley is just as much a victim of Jock's abuse as the rest of them are? Or hell, did she forget what she just told Blake last episode? That family still cares for each other even if they disagree on the right course of action? Do you really have to draw your weapon on him? He's unarmed, and as far as we know, completely untrained in aura and semblances. Where's your compassion that you spent the entire series developing? Blake notices Ruby staring off, and walks up to her. Ruby hopes that Yang and her group are alright, to which Blake suggests trying to call her. Ruby says that she already had, showing Blake her scroll trying to call Yang. It then cuts to Yang picking up some nuts and bolts from her bike, as John radios for any sort of evac to Mantle. It cuts again to the three walking in the snow, with John pushing the last bike they have. Yang watches their aura slowly tick down, and remarks that they need to find shelter before their aura completely breaks. She asks Ren where that outpost he saw was. Ren doesn't respond, prompting her to ask again. Ren cuts her off, saying he doesn't know. Yang looks at John, who shrugs. She then steps forward and mentions that he said he saw one while in the air. Ren says he did, but had to cut himself loose to save them from falling. Yang mentions how he's brought that up several times now, and asks if he has something to say. Ren says no, as he doesn't want to waste any more time. Yang stops in front of him and asks what his problem is. Ren tells her not to worry as Yang snaps back at him, snarkily apologizing that things haven't gone smooth enough for him. John tries to intervene but is ignored. Ren says things aren't going smoothly at all. Yang retorts that that's what being a huntsman is about, prompting Ren to snap. He says they don't know anything about being huntsmen, and that they clearly were not ready. John calls out again, but is again ignored. Yang asks if they weren't ready for Haven, and when they took down the Leviathan, implying the three of them actually had a role in killing the Leviathan, or when they got the land to Atlas. Ren responds that then they lost it, and when they had to make real decisions, they got every single one wrong. Yang acknowledges that they've made mistakes, but if they did nothing, things would be worse. Ren asks how, as they're stuck in the wilderness. Salem has the lamp and Oscar, and then adds they have no army or plans. Yang mentions they still have Penny, as Ren says their refusal to open the vault is just trapping the whole city for Salem. He then remarks that people are going to die because of them. Yang asks if they should just give Ironwood what he wants, an abandoned mantle, asking if he believes that Atlas can just float to safety with Salem still there. Ren exclaims that he doesn't know, but adds that he doesn't think that they should be the one making the decisions. John steps in again, telling them both to stop. Ren adds that he's just saying what no one else is willing to, that Ruby is just barely more than a kid, he's an orphan from nowhere, and that John snuck his way into Beacon. His voice echoes briefly as they hang on it. Ren realizes what he said and looks remorseful. John calmly states that it's fine for Ren to think they shouldn't be huntsmen, but he's going to get himself out of the cold, and starts walking again, adding that they still have a job to do. Yang asks Ren if his goal is just to push everyone away as she starts to follow. I'm really glad that Ren gets a chance to be the rational one in this scenario, how regardless of their intentions or combat abilities, they have no idea what it means to be the one to make the tough choices. I'm also really glad this argument happens. Not only does Yang's "are you trying to push everyone away" line allude to his development in this volume, but Ren snapping at John for sneaking to Beacon is just a perfect knife twist to raise tension. It then cuts to black, with Osmond telling Oscar that they'll be okay. Oscar then wakes up to find himself inside a room inside Monstra, with Salem resting against the wall in the shadows. She addresses him as her long-lost Ozma, found at last. It then pulls back to show Oscar hanging in the Hound's jaws as he struggles to free himself. Salem remarks how Ozma's new host is so small, and that it's a wonder the Hound didn't break him as she slowly approaches. She asks him how many years it's been since they've seen each other face to face like this. With no response from Oscar, she asks if he has nothing to say. Oscar mimics Osmond's cadence, saying he apologizes that their meeting isn't up to Salem's expectations. Salem angrily grabs Oscar by the chin and pulls him forward as she studies his face. She calls out Oscar for pretending, and states that she knows they haven't fully merged yet. She lets him go, and in a calmer voice, suggests that they could possibly have a better working relationship. She asks about the Beacon relic, stating that she's been unable to find it, and asks him where it is, knowing Osmond would likely have hidden it differently than the others. Oscar says that he doesn't know, which Salem accepts, as Osmond would likely keep that one guarded as long as possible. Oscar sighs in relief, as Salem then asks about the password for the lamp. Oscar states that the lamp is out of questions, to which Salem then responds by blasting him with magic, causing Oscar to scream out in agony. She remarks that lies come out of him so easily. As she approaches again, she caresses his cheek, which causes Oscar to flinch. She adds that they surely are like-minded souls. She starts to leave, saying he or Osmond will cough up the password eventually, and she doesn't care exactly which one. Oscar says he won't tell her anything. Salem makes an intrigued grunt as the door opens, and Hazel steps in, who punches Oscar in the gut immediately. The Hound drops Oscar as Hazel remarks that that attack was for Haven. He then kicks Oscar into the wall, cracks his neck, and states everything else is for Gretchen. Is there a reason why Oscar gets bullied on screen so much in this series? He got kidnapped and nearly killed by Neo, shot and left for dead by Ironwood, thrashed around by the Hound, and now blasted by magic, and beaten to a pulp by Hazel. There's nothing particularly wrong with this narratively, but it makes me wonder why it gets shown on screen as much as it does. Hearing this 15-year-old kid scream in agony as he's blasted with magic, and then beaten down by one of the physically strongest characters in the show, just because he drew the unlucky, like-minded souls lottery, just feels excessive. I mean, the Oscar Protection Squad exists for a reason. Salem leaves the room with her Hound and encounters Cinder and Neo. Cinder kneels and refers to Salem as Her Grace, before looking to the Hound and asking what it is. Salem refers to it as an experiment, and claims that she's pleased with the results so far, before asking if Cinder needs anything. Cinder nervously said that she wants to search for the Winter Maiden. As she's saying, "I think," Salem cuts her off, saying to the Hound, "You hear that, my pet? She thinks. She wants." As if she's done something to warrant me caring about either of those things. She begins to walk off as Cinder stands and starts to follow. She says they're just sitting there doing nothing, and without the maiden powers, the vault means nothing. She pleads to Salem to let her claim the power. Salem responds that she will tell Cinder where and when she's needed. Cinder tries to interject, but the Hound growls at her, making Cinder back off. Salem claims that she's shown a great deal of patience over her years walking Remnant, but she hates repeating herself. She then restates that Cinder will wait there until given further orders, and asks if that's clear. Cinder kneels before saying, "Of course," and repeats the "without you, I am nothing" line. Salem and the Hound then leave as Neo walks up to Cinder's side. I take issue here with Salem's treatment of Cinder, but it's part of a larger criticism that will become more relevant later on. So for now, I'll just leave it with. Also, I hate to say it, but I agree with Cinder here. There is literally no reason why Cinder should be left cooped up in Monstro, especially when we're never actually told what Salem's endgame is. We're just left sitting here wondering what the point of Salem's plans are if she has no way of getting inside the vault. Watts hasn't contacted Salem yet, so she doesn't even know he's alive, let alone that he has a hacked penny to open it for her. Without that, Salem has no tangible way to access the Atlas Vault in the first place, meaning her entire invasion is completely pointless. What if Penny was sent off to another kingdom? Salem would have no idea it happened until after she committed all of her forces. Does she have any other way to enter the vault that we're not privy to? No. What I think what really happened is, the writers knew that Watts was going to hack and command Penny to open the vault, so they decided that Cinder didn't need to be hunting her at that point in time, and just had Salem order her to stay put. The problem is, since that hasn't happened yet, and we're never told of Salem's plans, it just seems like Salem knows Penny is going to get hacked, and she's only acting this way because she's read the script and knows it's going to happen. Immediately after their meeting, Cinder leads Neo towards the docks, stating that she knows what Salem said, but she just wants to check on something, and claiming that they'll be back before anyone realizes. Neo floats in front of Cinder with an annoyed look, prompting Cinder to explain that she just wants to see if anything's going on at Amity Coliseum, claiming Salem doesn't know Team RWBY and their allies like she does, and that they won't just abandon their misguided attempts to save the world. Emerald appears, saying that if Neo doesn't want to go, that she will. She explained that she's been practicing with their semblance, and that she can help, promising not to tell anyone. Cinder thinks it over briefly before asking Emerald how much she's heard. On the one hand, I'm glad that Cinder is actually taking her own initiative and try to do something, but the problem lays with the context of Cinder's character in this volume. They want Cinder to both be loyal to a fault to Salem, but at the same time, be the rebellious subject who lets her own motivations cloud her judgment. You can't have it both ways, especially when Cinder is already walking on thin ice from her mistakes during the Haven invasion. It just makes Cinder's choice here to go investigate Amity on her own make even less sense. And while I recognize that Emerald is also loyal to a fault to Cinder, I don't understand why she'd be so willing to go against Salem's orders without any sort of coercion. Salem forced her to be the one to admit Cinder's misdeeds in Volume 6, yet she doesn't seem to remember how much that clearly terrified her. Does she also not remember what happened to Lionheart, or was that information not given to her? I have more to say on this dynamic, but this will be more relevant later. Also, why does Cinder want to investigate Amity in the first place? Even considering the line of, "I know they wouldn't give up," is meant to justify why she's going there, but it really doesn't. Cinder just exclaimed her motivations are to hunt down Penny and obtain the Maiden Power. So how exactly does going to Amity help her in any way? Yeah, there's a chance they could be there, but there's also a chance that they could be literally anywhere else in Atlas or Mantle. Cinder should know that RWBY and co are all considered fugitives, so why would she assume they'd be at Amity at all? Mighty convenient that not only do the protagonists go to Amity, not only that RWBY didn't have it guarded or otherwise monitored, especially after knowing what RWBY's team came for after they broke into his base, not only were they there at the same time Cinder went, but also that the one person Cinder needed to find just happened to be there. Man, like 2 characters, 2 scenes right after each other, both reading the script and responding to it accordingly. Gotta love that. Back in a small outpost in the snow, John bangs on a generator to get it working as Ren looks out the window. He sighs and admits to Ren that he did cheat his way into Beacon, and he expresses how glad he was that there were people around him to show him he was bigger than that mistake. John starts approaching Ren, saying that he has people around him that care about him as well, and he doesn't have to force himself to be strong. He adds that the more Ren tries to hide what he's feeling, the lonelier he's gonna feel. Without a word, Ren exits the outpost as Yang enters. She holds up a canister, saying, "If anyone cares, I found a part to fix the bike." As Yang walks towards the workbench, John looks outside and sees Ren taking a seat in the snow. Yang addresses John, saying, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry he said that to you. I know you've had to work hard to get here, John." John looks at her, saying they're all under a lot of stress, then that he used to push people away as well. Yang starts to work on fixing the bike engine for a moment before asking, "Do you think she thinks less of me for not helping out with Amity?" John turns to her and says, "RWBY's your sister. She's always going to love you, even if you disagree with each other." Yang doesn't face him before saying, "Yeah, RWBY." John sighs and lays in bed, saying that he should get some sleep, but can't stop himself from thinking about Oscar. Yang tells him to get to sleep, and that she'll make sure that Ren doesn't brood himself to death out in the cold, before stepping away from the engine and looking out the window. As John says, things always seem to get worse before they get better. The camera zooms past Ren to a crack forming some distance away. Alright, that's episode 4 finished. Here are our updated counters and charts. Part 2E, Episode 5. Episode 5, Amity, begins with Amity Coliseum floating over the dustbine that Team RWBY/JNR and the Aesops cleared out last volume. Pietro is working on something as Penny radios in. She's sitting in front of a bomb in the open cavern where the Aesops defeated that armored Geist. She suggests this isn't probably a good idea, as she's seen looking over the armed bomb. Pietro states there's a difference between a good idea and a best idea, adding they don't have time for anything else. Penny arms the bomb as Pietro lowers the center ring inside Amity. He explains they have enough systems to broadcast their message and keep Amity in orbit, but that their thrusters don't have enough force to get them up to the required altitude alone. Maria, piloting a mech, sets down a controller in front of Pietro, stating that, fortunately, they're sitting on a couple hundred tons of thrust. Pietro adds that once they're in broadcasting range, they will activate the stabilizers, re-establish global communications, and boost the message they recorded to the rest of the world. And after that, they'll just have to pilot Amity away from everything else. Penny flies to arm another bomb as she's asked, what if no one's able to come and help Atlas? She tries to suggest that she can stay behind, but Pietro stops her, saying, they're not having this conversation again. I'm your father, and I'm telling you that you belong on Amity. Penny sadly agrees. Maria asks Pietro if he thinks Penny has enough people telling her what to do. Pietro ignores the question and tells them to prepare for launch. Despite the contradictory nature of Penny's arc in this volume, I do like Pietro's actions here. Even if they seem selfish, it makes total sense that as a father who already lost his child once, he would be extra cautious about letting Penny do anything that could put her in harm's way. Penny flies out to join them as Pietro readies for liftoff. Pietro calls Penny over as Amity begins to requesting launch access. Penny transfers the clearance to it as the thrusters begin powering up. Pietro and Maria celebrate as he places his hand on Penny's arm. He warns them he wasn't able to install any seatbelts and tells them to hang on. His chair lights up with gravity dust as Maria walks towards her mech. The bombs in the mine begin a 30-second countdown as Penny assists Maria into the mech. Penny then notices a fireball shooting into the Coliseum and goes to investigate. Seeing Cinder standing there on her stolen airship, they've burned a hole into Amity and used it to enter the main Coliseum. With her maiden eyes glowing and projecting flames from her hands, Cinder asks where they think they're going. Penny looks back to Pietro, who pleads with her not to go, as Penny goes to engage Cinder. The bombs in the mine go off, launching Amity into the air and slamming everyone into the ground. In the command center, Ironwood gets a sensory alert and is shown Amity ascending. He says, it's time, and walks away from the frame. Was Ironwood aware of Team RWBY's plan here? Did he know Penny would be there? He makes a statement like they knew what their plan was going to be all along, but there's never any indication that he knew where Penny was, let alone that she'd be part of the team on Amity. It could be assumed that he figured it out based on their break-in to the base last episode, but that's not on the audience to assume that. The show needs to make it clear what Ironwood is doing, or else you'll end up in this scenario, where practically every scene Ironwood is in is just us asking, wait, what is he actually doing here? Back on Amity, Cinder exclaims to Penny that she hoped her friends would be there as well, as she summons dozens of glass swords. She adds that, it looks like they left you to do all the work. You're just a tool to be used. Penny claims that Cinder does not know what she's talking about. As the main thrusters shut off, Cinder attacks Penny, shooting her glass swords at her. Maria joins the fight in her mech, primarily fighting Neo, while Penny faces off with Cinder and Emerald supports from the sidelines with her semblance. I'm glad Neo reaffirms that she wants to kill RWBY in this fight, but the problem still comes down to the fact that she has no plans to actually achieving that, relying only on Cinder's promise to help her kill RWBY, which is not only dumb because we all know how unreliable Cinder is, but because Cinder has already proven that she's just using Neo to achieve her own goals. Is it too much to ask that Neo actually has some agency? Seeing the fights break out, Pietro dashes to the terminal to check on their ascent. Seeing they're above the broadcast range, he tries to activate the stabilizers, only to get an alert saying that one of them has been damaged, and they only have 3 minutes of broadcasting time. The damaged thruster is shown, with part of it melting due to Cinder's breach. Penny tries to lead Cinder away from Amity, but it doesn't fool her for long. Maria laughs as she near effortlessly knocks Neo down. Wow, I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm so scared for the lives of our protagonists. The frustrating thing about the scene is how much it trivializes Neo. Despite being a near constant high-powered threat for the protagonist, she just gets smacked around like a chump by Maria. I get Maria's semblance's reflexes, but Neo has always been the most clever and hardest to hit enemy the protagonists have ever faced. Unless the plot demands that she needs to get hit, I guess. Someone end my suffering, please. Cinder starts to melt the support pylons for Amity's platform as Penny reappears and asks why Cinder is doing this and why she's serving someone like Salem. Cinder says that she doesn't serve anyone, and Penny wouldn't either if she wasn't built that way. Vritzien will remember that. Penny hesitates briefly before declaring that she chooses to fight for people who care about her. She then stabs all of her swords into the platform and attempts to hold it up while using her maiden powers to cool the melting pillars. Cinder uses the opportunity to attack and attempt to steal Penny's power. This works somewhat before Penny uses her power to create ice swords to pry Cinder off of her. I also have to stop and ask why Cinder didn't threaten and or attack Pietro once the entire fight. Even if Cinder doesn't know who Pietro is, which I highly would doubt given that Watts would surely know, and Cinder has looked over Penny's schematics before, surely Cinder could deduce that Penny wants to protect him. Attacking Pietro would not only raise the stakes of the fight, but it would be a natural way to put Penny in a vulnerable position to steal the power, and would be much more likely to succeed than just melt a couple pillars, I don't know. Penny falls to the ground as Maria looks at her. Neo uses this distraction to knock Maria to the ground. She approaches, drawing her sword before Penny blasts her with an energy beam, shooting her into the ship and shattering her aura. Man, Neo only gets one good shot in it, and it was only because Maria was stupid enough to stop and stare at Penny in the middle of a fight. Way to establish the threat your antagonists impose on your heroes. Penny flies up to face Cinder again, who creates a glass sphere, and with Emerald's semblance, appears to surround Penny. Using her heat vision, Penny is able to detect the real Cinder, and... That's beautiful. It's so refreshing to see Penny actually using her robotic abilities to solve a problem and see through Emerald's illusion. Emerald runs to Cinder, pleading and hoping that she's alive. Penny approaches and Emerald fires a shot at her, nearly hitting Pietro. Penny takes a hostile stance. Emerald says she knows she can't beat Penny. This makes Penny's demeanor shift and her maiden eyes extinguish. Emerald then adds that she can fill that thing full of holes before you take me down, as she starts to cry. The stadium then rumbles as Penny stands down and allows Emerald to escape. I really like this scene on multiple levels. First, the fact that Penny only turns aggressive when Emerald's attack nearly hits Pietro speaks to how protective Penny is of her father. The fact that Emerald admits to knowing that she can't beat Penny but will fight to the death regardless to protect Cinder is a fantastic way to demonstrate her loyalties. Even if I think Emerald still being this loyal to her despite changing sides only a few episodes later doesn't make sense. Lastly, I love seeing the anger fade in Penny's eyes as she, in my opinion, sympathizes with Emerald for wanting to protect someone she cares about. Penny carries Maria up to the main platform and rushes to see if Pietro's okay, as he sighs in relief. Pietro explains that their stabilizer was damaged during the fighting, and that they've missed their window. Penny runs to the terminal, as Pietro adds that they'll drift until they touch down slightly north of Atlas. The stadium rumbles again as Penny nervously states that she can fix it. She suggests their message is only a few minutes long, saying that she can hold up Amity long enough to broadcast it. Pietro rejects it outright, as Penny is in no condition, especially with the temperature being as cold as it is. Penny retorts that this is their only option. Maria backs Penny up, reminding him of the big picture. Pietro cries out that he doesn't care about the big picture, and that he cares about his daughter. He starts to tear up as he says that he's already lost Penny once, and asks if they want him to go through that again. He explains he wants to watch Penny get the chance to live her life. She comes up to him and places a hand on his cheek, pleading with him that she's trying to. Pietro grabs her hand with both of his and slowly nods. Penny gives him a kiss on the forehead before flying off the Coliseum. She looks out over the city, Monstra, and the Aurora before flying towards the stabilizer. Fantastic shots, by the way. This is another amazing scene that, even after watching multiple times for this review, still chokes me up every time Pietro pleads for Penny not to go. At that moment, he's not Pietro, the former scientist of Atlas trying to save Atlas and Remnant. No, he's just Pietro, a man desperately not trying to lose his daughter for the second time. And Penny's soft pleading of, "I'm trying to," line is just fantastic. I just want to shout out Dave Vinoy and Taylor McNee for their fantastic deliveries here. Since I'm writing this after the Volume 8 Oscars have premiered, I'll add that I wholeheartedly agree that Taylor deserves the best voice actress for a leading role. Penny pushes herself into the thruster and powers her jet boots to the max. Boosted by the maiden power, Penny manages to push it up into broadcast range, allowing Pietro to initiate the broadcast. All across Remnant, a pre-recorded video of RWBY plays. As she talks, it cuts to show characters, new and old, listening to the broadcast. She tells them that Atlas is under attack by Salem. She explains that all their previous enemies, up to and including the Grimm, are all controlled by Salem. And, off-screen, explains the maidens and the relics to them. While acknowledging the absurdity of her claims, RWBY adds that Glinda Goodwitch and Headmaster Theodore of Shade can verify them. She continues that Ironwood can't be trusted though, as Harriet shuts off the broadcast. Ironwood then turns to Watts, who is tinkering with Penny's stolen sword. He says, Holodina's proxy trick worked, as Watts says it's good news for them. He explains that Penny and her swords operate in the same way as Amity in the launch terminal, as he takes out a chip with Penny's symbol on it. He adds that to control them all, they have to communicate with each other. RWBY's broadcast continues as she explains that while Atlas couldn't prepare for Salem, everyone else can, while Watts implants a chip with his symbol into Penny's sword. Instantly, Penny's maiden powers flicker, and she starts to lose control of herself. Penny desperately tries to keep Amity up as Pietro calls out and asks what's wrong, to which Penny says she doesn't know. As Ruby says that she hopes Amity will bring people back together from Taeyang's perspective, the feed cuts out. He calls for Ruby to come back and places his hands on his head in frustration and sadness. Zwei, the best boy, tries his best to comfort Tai. Pietro begs for Penny to come back. Penny, starting to lose control, says she has to go to the vault, and then cries out to Pietro before plummeting down to Remnant. Pietro desperately tries calling out to Penny one more time. She only manages to say, "I love you," before shutting off completely. This causes Pietro to break down crying. This is another good scene, I want to make that clear up front, but the way Penny gets hacked here made it extremely difficult for me to be invested in. How is it that, after one of Penny's swords is stolen, she and/or Pietro did not think to disconnect it from her network? It's not like it broke off during the fight with the Aesops retrieving it later. Harriet ripped it out of Penny's pack, and they immediately fled. It was so suspicious that both Blake and Weiss commented on it as the Aesops left. I know the heroes didn't know Watts is working with Ironwood, and never do if I recall correctly, but clearly Pietro noticed that Penny has lost a blade when she made it to Amity, right? Because in this episode, Penny only has 8 blades when she had 10 initially. Did she not tell him what happened? I'm not even opposed to the idea of Penny being hacked. I honestly thought it was something that was going to happen in Volume 7, and was really interested to see where it went when the trailer clearly alluded to it happening. My issue is, again, how it happened. If they did something like Watts uses some part of Penny's sword's programming to help him infiltrate Penny's source code and then upload the virus, I'd have no problem with it. I'm no expert in coding, but surely that makes just as much sense, if not more sense for a master hacker to do, than relying on a stolen piece of Penny still being connected to our network. This would not only follow through on Watts' admission on the difficulty of hacking Pietro's pet project, but they'd have to change literally nothing of the great stuff that happened on Amity's side, with the added bonus of not making Penny and Pietro look like idiots, and granting legitimacy of the idea that Pietro is such a good roboticist that the only way Watts could break in is to have direct access to Penny's source code. Also, I hope you enjoyed Pietro and Maria this volume, because this is the last time we see either one of them for the rest of the volume. Oh, you wanted to know how Pietro would have reacted to seeing his daughter alive and becoming a real girl, only to lose her a 3rd time? Well, too bad, RT wasn't able to squeeze him in.
Let me in! Let me in!
You aren't even sure if he or Maria are still alive? Penny's dead, and Maria filled her narrative purpose 2 volumes ago, so who cares about them, am I right? It's actually insulting to me that they would give Pietro such a great arc about coming to terms with Penny becoming her own person, but they don't even bother showing us Pietro's reaction when his worst fear actually becomes realized. Volume 3 did a better job of this, and back then he was just 2D concept art with 1 rendered hand. I swear, if he isn't in Volume 9 at all, it'll just prove to me that RT doesn't actually care about the show or its characters anymore. Whatever, I know I'm rambling here, and we're almost done, so let's move on. Harriet confirms that global communications are down, as Ironwood states that Penny hasn't responded. He quietly but sternly asks Watts what he did. Watts states, "Exactly what you asked," clarifying that her systems are likely rebooting. He adds that for the tower, Pietro might not have been the genius he thought he was. Ironwood throws his scroll at Watts, which he slaps away, cracking in half as it hits the wall. Ironwood declares he's not waiting as Winter enters. He orders her to take the Aesops and find Penny. They confirm and leave. He then orders Harriet to take Watts to his cell as he stealthily grabs his toolkit and Ironwood's cracked scroll. Okay, so I didn't touch on this during the broadcast scene, as I felt it more necessary to discuss it here. So, Ironwood mentions that Pietro's proxy trick worked. That, and Watts saying, "It's good news for them," implies that he, A, knew what Ruby and her team was doing inside his base, B, didn't do anything to try to stop them, and C, somehow this was part of his plan, or at least didn't impede it. That doesn't make any sense on any level. For one, if he knew Ruby and them were trying to relaunch Amity, which they never explain how he knows that, by the way. Hello again, future Vritzien here to clarify what I meant. Yes, Ironwood gets the sensory alert when Amity takes off, but at that point, which I discussed at the time, Ironwood already knew what their plan was and seemingly had a contingency plan for it. There is no scene where Ironwood pieces it together and starts to plan for it accordingly. He just knows, and we're not supposed to think about why he seemingly does nothing about it. Why didn't he try to stop/arrest them? Or, assuming he still wanted global communications reestablished, take over the project himself? Surely he could make the logical assumption that if they were trying to steal the credentials to launch Amity, that they either were close to or were able to launch Amity in the first place. When it comes to this being good for them, did he just mean reestablishing global communications? I believe that was the intention, because I failed to think of any other way that Amity's launch helped them in any way. And even in that case, RWBY blasted the entire planet that he can't be trusted. How exactly would that be beneficial to him? I considered it referring to the idea that Penny is at Amity, but I fail to see how that necessarily helps them either. As far as we know, there's no reason to believe that Penny had to be in the proximity of Amity for her proxy to work. And even if it does, Watts' hacking is done remotely. It doesn't even matter if Penny was on Amity or in Atlas. It would have happened either way. So again, why is Amity going up? Good for them. But addressing the last scene, it's insanely infuriating to me that Ironwood would even give Watts the opportunity to steal his scroll, or that no one in the room would consider making sure that the master hacker wouldn't get to manipulate the military dictator's scroll, and that almost certainly has access to practically everything Watts could need to sabotage Atlas even more. This keeps making me think about Ironwood's semblance, and my god, even if it is canon, it makes me wonder how he'd even tie his damn shoes in the morning without risking the entire security of Atlas.
Don't make me tap the sign.
It then cuts to Yang's team freaking out about the broadcast cutting out as they hear a rumble. They all run outside, following the sounds of the rumbling, and find the River of Grim streaming towards Atlas. I'm going to hold off talking about it right now, knowing it does its role the next episode. And with that, episode 5 is finished. Here are updated counters and charts. Part 2F, Episode 6. Episode 6, Midnight, opens with a similar shot from the beginning of the volume, including the same music. Intercut with the shots of a young malnourished Cinder sleeping the wooden floor of an older barn. A woman in a long red skirt and heels walks. Some kids bully Cinder, she sits and watches other kids play on the sidelines, and Cinder attacks one of the boys who pushed her. She's grabbed and thrown off the boy by an older man before cutting to black. A woman says, "I'll take her," before it cuts to Cinder staring at the entrance of a hotel called the Glass Unicorn in Atlas. The same woman, with a stern gaze, tells Cinder to come as she opens the door. Cinder gulps nervously as she enters and marvels at the high-class interior and its guests. She is led into the back room, where the woman, henceforth referred to as Madame, and her twin daughter is waiting. Cinder looks at the platter of food behind them and holds her hand out to it. Madame then informs Cinder of her chores to take care of in the hotel, specifying the floors should be clean enough to eat off of before starting to walk away. Cinder meekly asks for food, causing the sisters to laugh at her. Madame stops and throws a loaf of bread up to the ground for Cinder, telling her to hurry up and get to her chores, adding that the floors look filthy. Madame and the twins exit as Cinder falls to her knees and starts eating the bread. I really like that Madame explicitly says that the floors are filthy after throwing the loaf of bread to Cinder. It effectively conveys her cruelty and disregard for Cinder as a daughter, or even as a person. However, I have to wonder why Madame even wanted to adopt Cinder in the first place, and why she would go all the way to Mistral to adopt, rather than just going to an Atlas/Mistral orphanage. Regardless of the fact that one person being in charge of all these housekeeping tasks means the hotel would likely never be capable of keeping the whole place clean for its guests, Cinder simply just wouldn't be capable of handling all those tasks, be it requiring more strength than she has, or just because she likely wouldn't be able to reach many places to clean/maintain. Madame clearly runs a successful hotel. Surely she could afford to adopt more kids, right? Especially if Madame's goal for adopting Cinder was purely to be a housekeeper. On another related point, why adopt a child to do this work at all then, when Madame could likely get away with paying adult faunuses extremely low wages, and they would be much more effective for cleaning? Not only does this make more sense logically, it would be another tangible example of all the supposed higher amounts of faunus discrimination in Atlas, a way more stronger than a "we do not serve faunus" sign on the front desk does. See how RWBY's unwillingness to world build key elements of the story can drastically affect how engaging it can be? This one is a minor concern, but I wish that the sign for the Glass Unicorn was easier to read. The combination of the font, the color of the text, and the two illuminated pillars behind it make reading what it actually says difficult. I had to look up its name on the wiki just because it was too difficult to read. It then plays a montage of Cinder doing chores around the hotel, being mistreated by the guests and her family, while sneakily eating leftovers or whatever food she can get her hands on. It ends with Cinder tripping while carrying a tray of dishes, shattering many of them. Madame glares at her as Rhodes sees the commotion from his table. It then cuts to Cinder aggressively scrubbing the floors. She pauses and sees Rhodes showing off his weapons to the other guests. The twins then both approach Cinder with their shoes soaked in mud, as she rubs her foot into the recently cleaned floor. The two girls laugh as Cinder's grip on her brush tightens, and the parts touching her skin start glowing red. She screams in rage and throws the brush to the floor, causing a cloud of dust to cover them all. This grabs everyone's attention inside. Excuse me, but can we please get an in-show clarification of what Cinder's semblance actually is? I know that the companion book calls it Scorching Caress, and allows her to superheat objects and manipulate their form, but the problem is I had to Google that, or buy the book, just to know what a main antagonist's powers are and how they work. That's horrible storytelling, and something that Miles even said himself.
Yeah, when we first started writing the show, we weren't always great at establishing rules and stuff. And we're like, oh, well, we can say it at a convention. It's like, well, that's not great storytelling past us.
Yeah. It also doesn't make sense with how it's shown in the show. I started writing out my issues with their semblance as a whole initially, but I don't want to harp on this point anymore in this section, so we'll move on for now. In the back room, Cinder writhes in pain as the necklace she's wearing shocks her. Madame, holding the necklace's controller, lets go of the button and suggests that Cinder remembers her place. Cinder doesn't say anything, prompting Madame to shock her again and demands that she say it. After letting the button go, Cinder says, "Without you, I am nothing." So now that we've reached this scene, I want to delve deeper into my thoughts about this line and the symbolism behind it. So firstly, this scene should have been the setup for Cinder using the line for Salem. The lack of setup for Cinder saying this line to Salem makes it feel like a forced line, especially since it was unprompted. Because of that, when Cinder says the line here, my reaction isn't, "Oh, so that's why Cinder says it," but rather, what compelled Cinder to start saying this to Salem after all this time? In my opinion, if they flip when these scenes happen, i.e. Cinder saying the line to Madame first, and have Salem force Cinder to say it afterwards in a similar way to Madame did, or hell, like how she forced Emerald to blame Cinder for the failure of Haven, it would have made the connection much stronger. Secondly, I think the parallel between Madame and Salem is a fairly easy thing to notice, but I have a couple problems with its execution. For one, Madame is cartoonishly cruel and abusive to Cinder, but Salem, while harsh and callous towards her, has never really done anything on screen that's comparable to Madame. Every time Cinder's failed or disobeyed Salem, Salem drops it almost immediately. Not to mention Salem has A. assisted Cinder in becoming one of the most powerful people on Remnant, B. nursed Cinder back to health, up to and including getting her a replacement arm after the events of Volume 3, and C. practically lets Cinder do whatever she wants with minimal oversight and next to no real consequences for disobedience. The only punishments we've seen her impose are Salem hurting Cinder with her Grim Arm, and the banishment that didn't really need to exist. Cinder already wanted to chase down Team RWBY, and she never shows any real remorse for disobeying Salem, nor does Salem even discuss her banishment when Cinder returns. Sure, Salem talks down to her, but she shows nowhere near the same level of cruelty as Madame enslaving and abusing Cinder for at least 7 years. So what aspects of Cinder's relationship to the both of them are we supposed to take from this line's symbolism? They're both maternal figures to Cinder? Pretty weak symbolism if that's the case. That Salem's relationship with Cinder is toxic? I believe that was the intention, but as I explained, the contrast of how both Madame and Salem treat Cinder more easily implies that Salem is a relatively good maternal figure in Cinder's life. And the thing is, they already have a better connection to send the same message. The shock collar and Cinder's Grim Arm. Both are used to physically torture Cinder when she disobeys the person who gave them to her. If they cut that line from the entire volume and just focus on the connection between the shock collar and the Grim Arm more, I believe the message would have been much better received. Okay, I'm definitely rambling too much on this one line, so let's move on. Rhodes complains that one of his swords is missing to one of the sisters, who profusely apologize and promise to help him look for it, as Cinder retrieves it from an air vent. Cinder picks it up and studies it as Rhodes says, "Now, that isn't yours, is it?" Cinder is shocked and throws it at him. Rhodes easily deflects it using his twin maces. He tells her that he isn't there to hurt Cinder, and rolls the maces to her feet. Cinder nervously grabs one and tries to attack, but he catches it with his hand coated in a layer of metal. He tells her that he's seen Cinder around for a while, and states that she's certainly not getting the fairest treatment, adding that he can't blame her for what she's thinking. Cinder says that he doesn't know what she's thinking, but Rhodes cuts her off by declaring that hurting Madame and the sisters isn't going to make her life any better. Cinder looks down, defeated. Rhodes lets go of the mace, making Cinder slump over due to the weight, as he tells Cinder that she'd be on the run for the rest of her life, or she could find another way to handle it. Cinder starts to cry and asks if Rhodes means becoming a huntsman like him, going and doing whatever he wants. Rhodes sighs and asks Cinder for her age, which Cinder responds that she's 10. He asks if Cinder wants to be a huntress. Cinder lightly nods, and Rhodes goes to get his sword, stating that they have about 7 years. Cinder asks for what, which Rhodes responds with, "To train you for the huntsman exams," as he tosses the sword to her. A montage begins showing Rhodes training Cinder, leaving for a period of time, and coming back to continue. All the while, Cinder continues to be abused by Madame. It leads into Rhodes handing Cinder a copy of his sword, saying they only have a few more years until she can leave without Madame's permission. Cinder holds it up and stares at it, glowing in the moonlight. It then shifts to the sisters, alerting Madame that Cinder has a weapon. This isn't particularly a criticism, but why does the taller sister have that sadistic smile on her face? Her posture implies she's concerned or nervous about Cinder having the weapon, but with the look on her face, she almost looks excited. Was that intentional? The clock on the wall changes from 11:43 p.m. to about 11:57 as Rhodes enters the hotel, finding it completely empty. He approaches the desk as a crashing sound is heard. He charges in to find the sisters dead and Cinder lifting up Madame in a death grip while she repeatedly squeezes the collar button as hard as she can. Cinder doesn't react as she says,
"Without you, I am nothing. But because of you, I am everything. And I
am everything."
Okay, that is the cringiest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. How did this not get cut or fixed in the second draft? Oh my gods, please don't tell me this script is the first draft. The emphasis placed on this line makes it seem like it's supposed to be some profound galaxy-blowing reversal, but it's just nonsensical. What does it even mean to be everything? How did Madame make her that? Who thought this line was clever? Madame succumbs to Cinder's strangulation and dies. Cinder drops her and looks to Rhodes with a smile. She, in almost a psychotic voice, tells Rhodes she doesn't have to run now. Rhodes responds saying, "That's all you'll ever do," before slowly drawing his maces. Cinder's smile fades as a pained look emerges, quickly turning into an angry scowl. The two fight, leading to both their auras shattering and Rhodes seemingly knocking Cinder out. He drops his maces and slowly approaches her. When he gets close enough, Cinder stabs him in the stomach with both her swords. Before he dies, he places his hand on Cinder's head and giving her a sorrowful look. Cinder then rips the necklace off, showing a burn mark around her neck as she stares at the moon and begins to cry. Since it was the last thing to happen, and I have a lot to say about her backstory as a whole, I'm going to explain my thoughts on this fight first. Why did Rhodes drop his maces to check on Cinder? Even assuming Rhodes genuinely cared about Cinder and didn't want to kill her, she literally just murdered 3 people and was fighting to kill him as well, going as far as to try to burn his throat with her semblance. His death left no impact on me. The second he dropped his maces, I could see a million death flags popping up all over the place. Another reason for that is both their auras shattered almost instantly. Like, come on. A professional huntsman with likely decades of experience has his aura break from 2 light slashes. His aura arguably took less punishment than Cinder's, since Rhodes' attack would likely have more power behind it, and the fact that she was being shocked by the collar earlier. What's the point of aura being primarily used as a defensive mechanism when it's often arguably weaker than just regular armor? Especially when an aura break is supposed to correspond with a wave of fatigue. At this point in the series, I really shouldn't be surprised. The strength of aura and what it can do varies wildly every single time it's evoked, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to call it out. Lastly, I recognize this next part is deep in nitpicking territory, so I'm not going to add it to the counter, but how did it take 10 to 15 minutes for Cinder to kill the sisters and Madame when she was the only one armed? And why even strangle her in the first place? How did they even get up in that situation? Regardless, let's move on. So we finally got Cinder's backstory, and man is it disappointing. Not only does it not explain why Cinder craves power and wants to be feared to the extent that she does, it tells us nothing about how and why Cinder ended up joining Salem. It's so disconnected from the rest of the story that RT could realistically have cut it out entirely and they would lose nothing. The only tangible link between it and the rest of the show is the "without you, I am nothing" line, which I'd like to remind everyone was introduced in this volume and could have easily just not been included in the first place. We know the same amount of relevant information about Cinder that we did before Volume 8 began. Actually, we arguably have less because we have no logical through line to contextualize how she got from killing Madame as a teenager to where she is in Volume 3 when she's recruiting Emerald. 10-ish years later. On the topic of a through line, her backstory explains why Cinder has affinity towards dual wielding, but what about every other aspect of her fighting style? For a series where a character's weapon and fighting style are such prominent and personal aspects of who they are as people and warriors, the show is frustratingly uninterested in exploring any aspect of Cinder's fighting style, outside of dual wielding that is. Like, Cinder using archery was established in the same episode as her using dual blades, and was a prominent part of her fighting style during the Beacon arc, as her archery what helped her break Amber's aura, disabled her so she could steal half the Fall Maiden power, and is what Cinder used to both cripple and kill Pyrrha, yet it disappeared for seemingly no reason until last episode. I know I'm biased towards it, but surely they could have added a 3-second clip of Rhodes teaching her how to shoot during the training montage, right? When and how did Cinder learn to weave dust into her clothing? The lack of an answer for this question annoys me even more than the archery question. Despite being one of the 3 non-technological forms of dust usage, this is the only one that they really needed any sort of explanation for. Using raw crystals and jamming them into yourself are fairly blunt and straightforward methods, but surely weaving highly explosive magical crystals into clothing must be a delicate process that requires a high level of skill, don't you think? Is it not reasonable to expect that Cinder's backstory would include how she learned to use it? Especially since, as far as I can recall, Cinder's the only character to have used dust in this way. Granted, it gets dropped entirely in Volume 4 onwards. At this point, I have to wonder if dust-infused clothing is just no longer canon, which is just another point in favor of RT seemingly going out of its way to contradict everything stated in the world of Remnants. Assuming it is still canon, it's just another opportunity to world build that RT couldn't be bothered to do, I guess. Either way. Why does she have an affinity towards glass weaponry? I imagine it exclusively comes down to Cinder being based off Cinderella, which, while not inherently bad, is an extremely lazy reason to give Cinder that trait. As a final disclaimer, there is a possibility that we'll get more of Cinder's backstory in Volume 9, but that just makes my issues with how this is executed even larger. Thematically tying her relationship with Salem to Madame would imply that Cinder would turn against Salem, but despite having ample reason and ability to do so, Cinder still chooses to work with Salem after having 2 of the relics herself. If they truly are saving the most important parts of Cinder's backstory for Volume 9, I can't wrap my head around why they did it this way. As I've stated in way more words than necessary, what we got didn't service the plot in any meaningful way. Cutting what they showed here and replacing it with how Cinder joins Salem instead would have much greater utility in fleshing out the dynamic of their relationship, and could make it easier to understand why Cinder is so loyal to Salem despite constantly going against Salem's orders. Either way, I spent enough time on this, so let's continue. Present-day Cinder awakens on a bed inside Monstra with Emerald watching over her. Emerald exclaims she's awake as she falls to her knees in front of Cinder and grasps her Grimarm. Emerald says that she was worried and asks how Cinder is feeling. Cinder states, more for her benefit than Emerald's, that she brought Cinder back before looking away and sadly admitting that they failed. Emerald explains that Cinder was hurt and that she was just trying to help. Mercury enters the room saying that Cinder has had enough help, adding that she went against their queen, and points out that Emerald should be careful who she backs. Emerald plays defense, saying that Cinder was right and that if they had backup, they could have succeeded. Mercury tells Emerald to stop trying to protect her, and that Cinder doesn't care about her. Cinder's eye ignites as she demands both of them to leave, and that she'll let them know when they're needed next. Emerald, hurt by Cinder's command, looks away sadly. Mercury interjects, though, that he no longer works for Cinder, and that they're needed on the bridge as something big is about to happen. Emerald and Mercury leave as it fades out. I really like how Cinder echoes Salem when telling Emerald and Mercury that she'll inform them when they're needed. It emphasizes the callous way that Cinder treats Emerald, the same way that Salem does her. Over Black, Ozpin explains that it's his burden to bear, and not Oscar's. He restates that Hazel's grudge is with him. Oscar responds that if he switches, the torture would just get worse. He states that Hazel's been holding back as it shows Oscar bruised and bloodied. Ozpin says that Oscar has already been through so much, and states the least he can do is let Oscar rest and try to escape. Oscar says they can't leave yet, as this is their chance. Ozpin suggests that Oscar has taken too many hits, but Oscar explains that Salem can't fight the whole world at once, and how that she has her followers infiltrate and sabotage the kingdoms from the inside. In unison, they both state that they should try to do the same thing. Ozpin then jokingly states that they truly are similar, and that they may have been presented with an opportunity. While everything but Hazel holding back on Oscar, and how Salem can't take on the whole world at once is repeated information, I initially didn't want to add those bits to the soundboard, as I felt they were necessary to the flow of the scene. But you could reasonably cut both of those repeated lines, and go from Ozpin saying Oscar took too many punches, to Oscar then directly explaining how they could try to sabotage her from the inside, adding, like she does, to tie in that parallel to Salem's tactics much more efficiently. Time is a valuable resource in the visual medium like RWBY. Cutting those 10-ish seconds would give them more time to flesh out more important scenes. Hazel then enters the room and slams Oscar into the wall, and says that Oscar doesn't have to fight this war. If Oscar tells him the password, Hazel adds they'll be done. Ozpin and Oscar then switch, with Ozpin greeting him. Hazel grows angry and calls Ozpin a coward. He continues that it could have been him taking the punishment, but instead he allowed Oscar to suffer. He throws Ozpin to the ground and then demands again for the password. Ozpin then stands and asks why he's fighting for Salem. Hazel responds by kicking him in the chest. Ozpin states that he understands how Hazel sees him, but then asks about Salem. He pleads for him to look at what she does, and asks how this could be the answer, and why he doesn't try to stop her. Hazel states that she can't be stopped, explaining that she's a force of nature. He rips off a piece of bone and states that Ozpin sends children to their deaths for a cause that he knows has no victory. No end! Ozpin says someone has to try, stating she's not a force of nature because Salem can be fought, unless she brings all the relics together. Before he can explain what would happen, Salem enters, stating he has wonderful timing. She tells him the show is about to begin. Why did Oscar and Ozpin switch? Oscar refused it when Ozpin told him to do so, but then they just switch anyway when Hazel arrives. Was it part of their plan to have Ozpin talk to Hazel? If so, why did they not make that clear? Maybe if they had, I don't know, an extra 10 seconds freed up elsewhere in this scene, they could have given us an explanation for that. But I digress. It cuts to Salem on her throne with the Hound to her side. All of Salem's primary followers, and Oscar being held down and placed by Hazel, kneel directly in front of her while Cinder's assets kneel some distance to the side. Given that separation from the rest of Salem's minions, Emerald ending up switching sides at this volume, and the events of the finale, I believe this is meant to foreshadow Neo switching sides as well in Volume 9. If that's the case, I beg you RT, please don't mess that up. Anyways, Salem stands and approaches Cinder, saying they have good news, that Tyrion has heard from Watts, who updated them on the situation going on in Atlas and with Penny. She adds that he may still be useful after all. She then turns her attention to Cinder, causing her Grimmarm to burn into her. Cinder writhes in pain as Salem explains how she disobeyed her direct orders and failed again while Emerald watches in horror. As Cinder screams, a shot of her younger self being electrocuted by the necklace flashes, symbolically connecting her Grimmarm to the collar like I had mentioned prior. Salem then states that she realizes it's her fault. The pain in Cinder's arm subsides as Salem says that Cinder has fought her entire life unwaveringly, and that she's been holding Cinder back instead of lifting her up. She reaches her hand out to Cinder, who then takes it with her Grimmarm. She adds that Cinder deserves more than what she's been given. The Hound walks past Emerald and Neo as Salem orders Cinder to go to Atlas and recover Watts, who can lead Cinder to Penny. The Hound approaches Cinder as Salem declares that regardless of which one reaches Penny first, Cinder will have the Winter Maiden's power, and she will have the staff. Oscar shouts that they'll only be helping her bring the end for all of them before Hazel slams him into the ground. Salem approaches as Hazel lifts him up to her, declaring he's already too late. I don't understand Salem's logic of how she treats Cinder. Again, Cinder directly goes against Salem's orders and causes them to lose the lamp and one of its questions in Volume 5. But her punishment is some unexplained banishment that lasts until her return in Volume 8. Cinder then disobeys direct orders again, fails to accomplish anything towards Salem's objectives, and is then instead allowed to act as she already was, but this time with Salem's blessing. This scene is the only time Cinder's been tangibly disciplined on screen, and it's immediately followed by Salem giving Cinder exactly what she initially wanted. Outside of the nebulous idea of being the vessel for the maidens, seems to be nothing more than a liability than a useful asset. Sure, Cinder does succeed in getting the staff for Salem this volume, but at this point in time, Cinder's gone against Salem twice, and both times it's hampered Salem's ambitions. I get she's immortal, and thus can be patient, but she killed Leo with no hesitation despite his crimes being doing exactly what he was told, and leaving a fight that was already lost. As far as we know, the only value Salem sees in Cinder is as the host for the maidens. But why does it have to be Cinder? Emerald and Neo both could be that same person, but Salem never addresses that possibility. Remember, Salem only uses people until they are no longer useful, right? So all we can do is speculate on why Salem acts this way until the show finally decides to give us an answer. Imagine an alternate Volume 8, where instead of forgiving Cinder, Salem tries to convince Emerald to try and become the new vessel for the maidens. This would tangibly allow Emerald to understand that Cinder really doesn't care about her, as Cinder would never let Emerald take her place. Actively demonstrates Salem as the puppet master the show wants her to be, and could be a natural factor to push Emerald towards the good guys. But no, I guess not. Also, this is something that I hadn't initially considered, but after I was talking about my issues with this to a friend, they pointed out something that I had overlooked. How come Salem doesn't take the maiden powers for herself? As far as I'm aware, there's no reason to believe that the artificial system in which Cinder steals the power from the other maidens wouldn't work with Salem, and Salem having the maiden powers would permanently remove the maidens from the equation, as well as making Salem even more powerful. Since Salem can't be killed, the maiden powers could never be transferred to anyone else. That would prevent the power from ever being used to support the protagonist, and would make it impossible for them to access the vaults ever again. It's literally a win-win for Salem, but it's something that's never been addressed. So, why exactly isn't she doing that? Back with the Aesops on an Atlas ship, Elm argues about whether they can trust Watts. Vine says they have a confirmed visual on Penny leaving Amity, and that she appeared to be malfunctioning. Elm cries out this is why she doesn't trust technology, as she's now searching for broken junk. Minor point, but if Elm doesn't trust technology, why does she have a technological weapon in the first place? Why not have her use dust crystals, and or inject them into herself? Or better yet, give her a uniform infused with dust. Is it really that hard to do? Winter orders them to be quiet, reminding them that they're Atlas Elite and that they need to act like it. Marrow alerts Winter that they're receiving an open broadcast. Winter tells them to play it. John's message about the Grim River heading towards Mantle is then heard. It then cuts to the Aesop ship landing in front of Yang's team. Yang annoyedly says, "Great, it's you guys." John asks if they got his message and points to the crack in the ground, saying that it's right there and that they need to hurry. Harriet demands to know where Penny is. John asks if she's serious and that there's people in danger. Harriet responds saying that people are in danger because of them acting selfish. Before she can continue, the ground rumbles, stretching from where they're standing to Mantle. From the ground below Atlas, the river shoots up and rams into Atlas's hardlight shields. They all look in horror as the Grim breach the shields and stick to the underbelly of Atlas. 6 sentinels emerge and burrow into the ground to break off the shield pylons at their foundation. Panic spreads across the kingdom, with even Ironwood staring in disbelief. An Atlas flagship starts shooting down, but cannot hit all the Grim. As the 2 pylons fall, the whole shield shuts off. Salem then declares it's time as Matra beaches itself on the farms outside the main city. It spits out a pool of Grim that spawn various species before it cutting to black. One quick highlight I noticed before I go into the issues of this scene, I actually didn't notice on the first viewing, but the fact that Matra has gravity dust embedded into it is actually a very clever way to depict its ability to fly. I had just choked it up as anime logic initially. Now that the Grim River has fulfilled its purpose, let's talk about it. Remember how I mentioned how pathetic Atlas's shields are? Well, here's the pinnacle of that frustration. It took the Grim River all of 6 seconds to puncture the hole in the shields and to stick to Atlas and spawn those sentinels, which makes you wonder, what's the point of waiting all this time for it to arrive in the first place? Considering the fact that Mothra can spawn a seemingly infinite amount of Grim, what's the harm in Salem throwing it or even a few fodder Grim at it until the shield went down? Surely a concentrated attack on that part of the shield with T-Rexes and other avian Grim would have accomplished the same goal, right? Then have the Sentinels airdropped onto the breach to take down the pylons like they did in the canon version. Why bother waiting nearly half the volume in the periphery of Atlas when it was really that easy? What benefit does Salem gain from this? It's because the plot demanded it, isn't it? I imagine you might suggest that the reason she didn't was because of the Atlas fleet around the city, and had to use the Grim River as a sort of sucker punch to take them down without losing too many of Salem's forces. Well, the problem with that is, as the next episode proves, not only is the entire Atlas military, excluding the bomb, which they could not have gotten inside Mothra, as it is explained that they couldn't even approach without their ships being taken down, unable to damage Mothra, and thus unable to stop it from breaching the shields on its own, let alone with the, largest Grim Horde ever seen supporting it. The fleet can barely do anything to stop the Horde even before the shield is downed. So again, why is she waiting? I want to turn your attention to this shot right here. If you're not sure why I'm focusing on this shot, allow me to give you some context. Throughout the entire time the heroes have been in Atlas, Sentinels have just been fodder Grim. I can't be bothered to count them all, but Team RWBY and the other protagonists cut them down with barely any effort expended. And yet, it takes 2 full-powered lasers from an Atlas flagship to take 1 Sentinel down. To my understanding, there's no official size for these flagships, but considering the one that RWBY fought Neo and Roman on in Volume 3, they must be in the same ballpark as modern-day warships. Given that, they should have a comparable level of power behind those shots. And that's the thing, I do know they're similar in power. When Roman hijacks one in Volume 3, he's able to completely disable another flagship with just 2 shots. So why does it also take 2 shots to kill a single Grim weak enough to be killed in a single strike by a single person? And shouldn't a single shot, let alone 2, have a large enough blast radius to take out a condensed pack of 3 Sentinels? Or maybe I'm just being over-charitable, and these flagships are actually so weak that it takes the same amount of force to disable one as it does to kill a single fodder Grim. Also, what happened to the rest of the fleet while the Sentinels were trying to sabotage the shields? The final pre-credit shot of Volume 6 shows Atlas has at least 39 flagships hovering around the city. Am I supposed to believe that only one commander was willing to take the initiative to order their ship to try to stop the Grim from destroying the only thing holding Salem back? What the hell are the rest of them doing? The next episode shows us about 5 or so flagships during the first wave of Salem's attack, but where do the rest of them go? Did they get destroyed off screen without any indication? Wouldn't be entirely out of place for this series. Either way, all these issues demonstrate Atlas being so laughably pathetic that it's a miracle humanity survived as long as it has. And they're supposed to be the most technologically advanced kingdom? How the hell did the rest of them survive? With that concludes our coverage for this video. Here's our updated counters. I'd like to thank everyone for watching this video. Your support means a lot to me and encourages me to keep the series going. If you have not already, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing the bell for my channel. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon, linked below in the description. It really helps me commissioning the art assets that allow me to focus on the other parts of making these videos. On that note, remember to go check out @BerwinX and @hop_soup on Instagram and flood their feed with likes. I know they would appreciate it immensely. Thank you all again, and I will see you next time.